Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Tim sent me a fascinating story out of California, Orange County to be specific. The DA asked to investigate Orange County's illegally recorded attorney-client phone calls. And this is a bizarre story out of the Orange County Register. Tony Saavedra wrote it, but the assistant public defender accuses the jailhouse phone vendor of a mix of deception, active concealment, and perjury. And you should know that when an attorney and a client speak to each other, their communications are privileged, meaning that they're protected from being divulged to other people. And that obviously is important for people who are incarcerated. If you are in jail and your attorney comes to speak to you, they've got to find you a place where you can speak and be alone. And then, of course, your conversations cannot be eavesdropped on or spied upon or intruded upon. And so what's going on here is when attorneys call and speak to a jailed person over the phone, the allegation is that many of those phone calls were recorded and then divulged to people they shouldn't have been divulged to. So an Orange County assistant public defender is calling for a criminal investigation into the illegal recording of nearly 34,000 attorney-client phone conversations from the county jail and sheriff's deputies who listened to some of them. So the recording of these is obviously a problem, but then the fact that other people listen to them is an even bigger problem. In a strongly worded court motion, Scott Sanders requested the Orange County District Attorney's Office and the Sheriff's Department investigate the errant recordings which violate one of the most sacred tenets of the law, which is, of course, the attorney-client privilege. Now, there's a jail phone vendor, and you may have heard that a lot of jails and prisons basically send this stuff out for bids, and they let companies bring in phone systems and then charge exorbitant amounts of money for the phones, and that's a profit center for the jails and the prisons and so on across America, probably in other countries too. And so GTL of Reston, Virginia, had twice before accidentally recorded confidential attorney-client calls in Florida in 2015 and should have known it was probably happening in other places, according to Sanders. Again, accidentally recorded the phone calls. GTL embraced a path of inaction and silence, knowing this would lead to unlawful recordings of potentially millions of calls, referring to a nationwide situation Sanders wrote in court papers on one case he was handling. When the issue emerged years later in Orange County and exploded in a way unlike what occurred in Florida, they shifted directions, employing a mix of deception, active concealment, and perjury, he wrote. District Attorney Todd Spitzer responded that no agency has officially requested a criminal investigation. He said, I was on the Board of Supervisors at the time that this came to light in 2018, and I was very critical of GTL's conduct at that time. However, I have checked with those who were here at the time, and no outside agency, including county council, referred this issue to the district attorney's office for criminal review. Well, maybe they should. Sheriff's officials said they reacted responsibly to notify the affected defendants and make corrections with the vendor, which remain with the county. A consultant has been retained to help the county seek proposals from other potential phone service vendors. But again, they're not explaining why they actually listened to these recordings when they knew that was illegal. They should have known that. The estimated number of calls has come and gone. It's fluctuated a bit. GTL spokesperson has placed it at over 4,000 calls that were recorded, and then 29,000 unanswered calls that were recorded, but there's no explanation as to how or why you'd record an unanswered phone call. Isn't that just the dial tone of the phone ringing? I don't get that. When asked for further comment, the spokesperson declined on the phone, ironically. GTL is one of the largest telecommunication systems for jails and prisons in the nation. When the first recordings occurred in Florida, they commanded half of the $1.2 billion industry. A lot of money in phone calls. In his motion, Sanders asked a judge to throw out burglary charges against his client because of the outrageous prosecutorial misconduct. Instead, Deputy District Attorney brokered a deal with him and his client that releases him from jail with time served. With the case settled, Sanders said his challenge to the DA's office and the Sheriff's Department still stands. Kind of like, hey, look, with my guy, we've resolved that issue, but it doesn't resolve the other thousands of conversations that were recorded. According to the sheriff's office, the former sheriff was notified by GTL in June of 2018 that more than 1,000 calls from jail inmates to attorneys were accidentally recorded during the previous 3 years. With the help of a GTL technician, some of those recordings had been accessed by deputies and forwarded to prosecutors handling related cases. So you've got deputies who are doing something wrong, and you've got prosecutors who are doing something wrong, if those allegations are true. No question. GTL wrote to the former sheriff that the error was made because an employee who was upgrading the system failed to place the lawyer's phone numbers on the automated do not record list. According to GTL, this employee had made the same mistake twice before at Florida jails in 2015. But again, there's no explanation as to why the recordings, which shouldn't have been made, were then forwarded to people who shouldn't have heard them. This is not just one mistake. This is several mistakes at best. Orange County prosecutors, the courts, and the public defender's office are now working to identify which calls were recorded, which cases they were on, who the defense lawyers were, and to notify those defense lawyers. Because now you may have to go back and retry cases. Sanders alleges that GTL knew about the Orange County situation long before it contacted Hutchins, and that individual deputies also knew the calls had been recorded because they accessed them. So obviously, if someone says, here, do you want to listen to this phone call that you shouldn't hear? And you say yes. Number one, you're breaking the rules by saying yes and listening to it. But number two, you know it exists. So, by the way, there were probably other people who said, do you want to hear this phone call? They probably said, no, I'm not allowed to hear the phone call. But they knew it existed too. So the fact that none of this came to light when it should have is another problem. Sanders wrote, unfortunately, the culture of concealment and deception seems to run downhill at the OCSD, the Orange County Sheriff's Department, referring to an earlier controversy about the improper use of jailhouse informants. And I know what that's all about. I read articles on it. I've seen documentaries on it. But Orange County, by the way, this happens everywhere, but it happened in Wayne County too. But Orange County had a problem where they would have some jailhouse people. And what they would do is if they arrested you and didn't have a good case against you, they'd put you in a cell. And then a couple days later, you'd wind up having a new cellmate who would show up and go, hey, what are you in for? And would start talking to you and then start asking you questions. And then eventually they'd take him out of the cell and go, hey, what'd you learn? And he could make up stuff. He could say, yeah, the guy admitted he did it. And there's a problem with those kinds of jailhouse informants because they know that if they make up something good, they can get out. Because usually there's somebody who's in on some kind of charge that's deemed to be lesser than the charge that you're facing if, in fact, you had done it. And Detroit actually had one or two guys who were really, really good at making up believable stories. And they documented cases in Michigan where guys who hadn't done anything wrong were done in by jailhouse snitches who just came across really believably when they were on the stand committing perjury. It's the weirdest thing. Some people are good at testifying, which is not something you should be good at because why would anybody need to testify that often except jailhouse snitches? And then you ask yourself, wait a second, why is a jailhouse snitch in jail often enough to become good at becoming a jailhouse snitch? Problem there too. So whole bunch of other problems, but here the problem is that they bring in a third party to handle the telephone system because that's how you make the most money at it. And that vendor screws up and accidentally records thousands of conversations. And then those conversations are accidentally turned over to the sheriff and the prosecution without being disclosed to the defense attorneys. So it's violations all the way around. And probably going to see a whole bunch of cases that have got to get retried because of this. But heads should roll figuratively, because whoever's in charge when that stuff happens ain't doing their job right. And it makes people really question the legal system when those kinds of things happen. So there you go. Again, Tim, thank you for passing on the story. Story is written by Tony Saavedra out of the Orange County Register, and it ran just a couple days ago. And Tim passed it along. And again, I'll mention simply because I have to. If I don't mention it, people will ask. Subconjunctival hemorrhage. Looks weird, but it's getting better. Literally, if I didn't own a mirror, I wouldn't know it was there. That's how little it affects me. Questions, comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Only those who dare to fail greatly can ever achieve greatly.